What kinds of books are motivating and engaging for struggling and reluctant adolescent readers? And what does it mean when we label kids as being struggling or reluctant readers? That's what we're talking about in this video. Hi everyone, I'm Lee Hall from Literacy Teachers, and I'm all about helping you inspire, motivate, and change how your students read and write for academic success. If you are new here, welcome. You have picked a great time to join us because today we are going to be talking with the fabulous Kellee Moye from the website Unleashing Readers. We're going to be talking about how you can use books to motivate struggling and reluctant adolescent readers and what it means when we use those terms. What kinds of consequences does it have when we label kids? So let's head over and hear what she has to say. All right, everybody, welcome. Today I have with us the fabulous Kellee Moye. Kellee, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. Kellee is a former middle school English language arts teacher, and currently she is a middle school reading coach and teaches a reading elective class at her middle school. And she co-runs this fantastic blog called Unleashing Readers with Ricky Ginsburg, who we had on earlier. And I'm gonna have a card pop up that's gonna link to my interview with Ricky, and so you can watch that if you haven't seen that yet. Make sure you check that out. But otherwise, Kellee and I are going to be here today talking about two things. The first thing that we're going to talk about is books that it can engage middle school students, get them motivated and loving reading. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the ways that kids get labeled. So why don't we start off with Kellee? You obviously have a broad and deep range of knowledge around young adult literature and just books in general that middle school students are going to love and be able to connect with. So teachers that are looking for good books or struggling to get their kids motivated and engaged, what do you recommend they do?
Well, the very first thing I do before I start recommending titles is you have to talk to the kids. Nothing that I recommend here is going to be perfect for every single student, because if you have a student that liked Rick Riordan before and feels like there's nothing else out there to read now that they've read every single one of his books, may not like one of these books that I recommend and needs a different recommendation. But I feel if there's a kid that comes in and says, I do not like reading, I always start with Amulet by Kazuo Kobayashi, which I think I'm pronouncing it correctly. Amulet is a very complex graphic novel. And so it's one that they can argue with their parents as real reading, because our biggest throwback with graphic novels is with parents. But it's also adventurous and interesting. And I have found that graphic novels are a way to engage students that may not always like the act of reading. I also this year had really high success with the book House Arrest by K.A. Holt, which is written in verse about a boy who is on house arrest. And students feel more successful because they can read it quicker, because it's in verse, but it's also verse makes them think in a different way than what prose does. Those are my two that were new this year. Rick Riordan's always a great place to start. But with most books, it just depends on what the kids say to you and what books that they liked beforehand.
So you've got this great post, and we were talking a little bit beforehand, and you said it's about 5 years old. And it's on your blog called Top Books for Struggling and Reluctant Middle School Readers. So I'm going to link to that in the show notes, and people can check that out. But one of the things that we were talking about is your struggle with this terminology of struggling and reluctant. So what is it that you personally struggle with? What kind of insights do you have for teachers about how we label kids as readers?
Well, I think that every child is just a reader. And I think I even put that in the introduction to the post. I said, I want these kids to stop having to deal with the label. I'm just trying to help them get to the label of reader. However, we have these tests that we give kids, and when they don't pass the tests, all of a sudden they get these labels. Bottom 25%, struggling. Or we have the kids who score high but don't like to read, so they're reluctant. And if we think about any label that any of us have, if we are a teacher and get labeled ineffective, how does that affect us? And so I always worry that when we say these labels about kids, mostly around them, they automatically feel that they cannot get better. But I'll be honest, when I did teach the intervention reading class, I talked to my students about this, And their response was not that. They said that they are struggling, and that if they weren't labeled that they may not get the help that they needed. But then I also know that there have been studies that say by giving them that label, we are putting them down and they're not able to thrive. Mm-hmm. So I go back and forth all the time. I did label the post that because that is the terms that are used and what teachers will look for. And I hope that they can find the posts that they can get books into kids' hands. But I used striving for a while, but then that didn't feel right. And I wish that we could just call all kids readers, but I also know that different books and different teaching techniques are for different kids.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember once talking to an 8th grade girl, and she was saying that, so she was labeled as somebody that was like on grade level, right? Like an average reader. And she said, well, the kids that are labeled struggling, they get an extra class. And she said, I don't think it's a very good class, but she said they get an extra class. And she said, and the kids that are really advanced, they get special classes too. And she said, so it's sort of like she felt like if you're in the middle and you were just sort of meeting everybody's expectations, you didn't get any extra attention or extra help. And so she saw in this case, like what we might say is a more negative label and a more positive label, those kids getting attention. So I think you're right in sort of thinking about you're a reader and here's where you are and here's what you need, right? But then these labels sort of end up pigeonholing kids.
Well, I also really think it depends on how they're dealt with at a school. Mm-hmm. My school, I have worked very hard. There's actually a post from Stephanie Harvey today that said we need an intervention on interventions, that the best intervention is putting a book in kids' hands. And I very much agree with that. And throughout, whenever I would read about interventions, it's half the class go on iReady on the computer or go on Read 180 on the computer, and half the class will work in the workbook. And that's not helpful. So I have thought, I taught reading intervention for 2 years, and I've been the reading coach for 5. So for the last 7 years, I have thought and been able to keep independent reading as one of our rotations. Mm-hmm. And my students in my school in general are very successful. I have a highly diverse school, and that's growing, unfortunately, in poverty level also. But just on test scores that we got this week, we're 3rd in the county. And I really, really believe that a lot of it has to do with our intervention classes are on standard, include independent reading, don't make the kids feel like they're in a dumb class. And actually, we talk to them all the time about how this is like getting extra practice if you're on a sport with like the really awesome coach. Because like now you've got this great person who already has a reading coach over them. So you have these 2 extra people that are there to help you. And so I think that if you deal with it that way, kids then feel like they have a support system instead of feeling like they're being put down. So I really think it depends on how the labels are treated in a school also.
Yeah. And like you said, the kids are honest, I find, especially teenagers, about themselves if you sit down and talk with them and about their abilities and about how they perceive and how they think that you perceive them as a whole. And I think your earlier point about just talk to the kids, right? Talk to them about what kinds of things they're interested in, what kinds of books they like, but also talk to them about themselves as readers, how they understand themselves and where they want to go. I think that really is important in sort of thinking about how do we design programs or instruction and make decisions.
Well, and also once they've been to middle school and high school, if they are behind in grade level in reading, they've probably been labeled that for years. Mm-hmm. And they have, a lot of the kids who have been in our classes are starting to give up, feel that they're never going to be successful. So just by talking to them and helping them find the right things to show them they can be successful is really important too. But you can't get that by doing the same thing for all the kids.
Right.
You have to talk to each of them. And that's why I think it really takes a special teacher to teach the intervention classes and be successful at them. Versus just throwing any random teacher to watch kids on a computer.
Yeah, absolutely. Because like you said, by the time kids are 12, 13, 14 years old, if they've had this label as struggling or whatever, they've had it probably since 1st grade. At least when I talk to kids, that's what they say, since 1st grade.
Because we start, in our county, I know a lot of counties do, they start doing the iReady diagnostic in kindergarten.
Right.
They would be labeled from kindergarten if they were behind.
So you as a coach, you're trying to, and even any teacher that's watching this, if you're a middle school teacher or a high school teacher, what I think you're saying is you have to know and recognize this history that these kids are bringing with them, and then undo that and show them you don't have to stay stuck on this path. You have to unstick them, right?
Yeah, and that it takes work.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly, I mean, if they are grade levels behind, it takes work, but that they can do it.
Mm-hmm.
And that it's not something that is a punishment. Like, this class isn't a punishment, it's a help. Or this intervention is a punishment, it's a help, because you can do this. We believe in you, you can do it.
Yeah.
And it needs to really be like the strongest, most positive class that there is.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it sounds like you're doing amazing, amazing work. So thank you so much for, coming on and talking with us. Again, this is Kellee Moye, middle school teacher extraordinaire, reading coach extraordinaire. And I'm going to be linking to the blog Unleashing Readers. You've already seen the link to my earlier interview with Ricky. And I'm going to be linking to this top books for struggling/reluctant middle school readers, so that you can check that out. And any kind of questions that you have for us about books that are going to be good to help motivate and engage your students, questions that you have about struggling readers or reluctant readers, how we identify them, how we work with them, put all of that in the comments, because we would love to hear from you and talk to you more. So Kellee, thank you so much.
Oh.